Hello, everyone, and welcome to Old World Tech Fridays, episode 29. How is everyone this evening?
Fantastic. Yourself?
Tired.
Yeah, it's Friday.
It is.
Hey, you see, Trina, our guest has a reason to be tired because it's like past midnight where they are.
Yeah, it's
What's
1
your
a.m.
excuse?
101?
What's my excuse?
Yeah.
I woke up stupidly at 5:30 this morning and could have went to so easily could have went and couldn't get back to sleep. And then by 6:30, all I wanted to do is go back to sleep.
Okay, so let's address the elephant in the room first because I'm a little confused. So we talked about this pre-show. Gutbaum put the comment at Frank S! Exclamation, but we don't see any comment from Frank S. And
I know.
then he says here down at the bottom, hello everyone else that isn't Frank S. as well.
And
Maybe
it shows-
he's filling in for Frank S.
I think Frank S. and
Or-
Gutbaum are the same person.
Oh, could be.
Or
could
maybe,
be.
Frank S. is a ghost.
I think it's a running joke from the other day because Gutbomb came into chat and shouted Frank S when he was actually in voice chat, and then he was leaving, and then he came back in again a few seconds later, shouted Frank
So-
S, and then
Essentially, he pulled a Leroy Jenkins.
Yeah,
just
Correct.
Last second came into the raid, just went right in there screaming Leroy Jenkins.
There we go. We know the answer.
I
That
can
makes sense.
actually verify that Gutbaum and Frank S. are two different people because I have shipped to both Gutbaum and Frank S.
And two
And
people
Frank
can't.
G.
One person can't own two different places. It can't happen.
Exactly. Well, one's in the north and one's in the south of the states. So I can't imagine
Yeah.
them owning two different properties.
Well,
that
most
separate.
places people live up here during the summer, and then they go
Yeah.
to Florida and things for the winter. So that happens here all the time.
True.
Or in California, where you
But
just
we
go from
have-
Northern California to Southern California.
We have seen Gutbaum though in his natural habitat
That's true.
in
That is very
northern states. So
And
and apparently
Ericus
Eric's
Spartacus.
is Spartacus. Yes.
Yes, that makes sense. Anyway,
that's fine.
so let's get started. So I am Frodo Jedi, and I'm joined by my co-host Ryan from Everything's Broken Garage, as well as Trina from Trina's Technobabble, and our special guest tonight, Martin from UK Macintosh Unboxed or Macintosh
Yes.
Unboxed UK.
yes.
So Gene Wilder scratch that, reverse it. So it is Macintosh Unboxed UK.
Yes.
Perfect. So we'll talk to Martin here in a couple minutes about some things going on his way. And Trina, who do we have in the comments? I know I mentioned
Yeah,
Gutbaum
who do
Frank
we have?
S situation.
We
but who else?
have Gutbaum. We have Eric and Eric. That the Erics are in the chat.
Mhm.
We have Garth Beagle.
We can't
we
forget about
have
JC.
JC's in the chat. I'm scrolling up, so as we're going.
Oh.
And that seems to be it so far.
Did you mention Garth?
Yeah, I did. Yeah.
Okay,
Yes.
I completely missed it.
What about
Yeah.
you missed somebody? What about Garth? What about Garth?
We can't forget
No,
about Garth.
listen. Trust me. I'm going to be like Garth. I need at least another, I don't know, 2-3 years to think about maybe saying Garth's name.
And Curtis Boyle.
Right. Yeah, Curtis is
Curtis.
here as well.
Hello.
Good evening. You
You
forgot
forgot
Garth.
Garth.
We forgot Garth.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you forgot
Yeah.
Garth, Trina.
Classic.
I said Garth. Okay, fine. Hold on. Let me go back. So we have Gutbaum, Curtis Boyle, Eric Rangel, Eric's Edge, Garth fucking Beagle. There.
So that's what the F stands for. Okay, that makes sense.
JC.
Ah, there you
Trina's
There
here.
you go.
go. And demonetized.
So, hello and thank you everybody for joining us tonight for episode 29
Welcome.
of Old World Tech Fridays. Let's see, this day in tech history. So normally I go from Sunday through the end of the week, but I'm actually going to back up a little bit because Sunday essentially was the 10th, but I'm going to back up to Saturday the 9th because there were a couple other cool things that happened on the 9th that I just wanted to briefly mention, such as Douglas Engelbart demos the mouse, December 9th, 1968. They did a 90-minute public technology demonstration, including such innovations as hypertext, video conferencing, and most famously, the computer mouse. This was the first public demonstration of the mouse, witnessed by about 1,000 computer professionals in attendance. Also, December 9th of 1987, I was, not even 6 months old. A worm for Christmas. The Christmas tree worm begins to affect IBM mainframe computers around the world. The worm was delivered by email and drew a Christmas tree text graphic in ASCII on the user's monitor and searched out other network users to email, named Christmas EXEC because IBM systems only supported 8-character file names at the time. It was the world's first widely distributed computer worm. While the worm was not intentionally destructive, the volume of emails it created could disrupt a user's work and began to overload email systems. It reached IBM's VNet email network on December 15th, and 2 days later had crippled it to the point that they actually had to shut it down to eradicate the worm. Another December 9th, 1987, Microsoft releases version 2.0 of Windows. The most notable feature of Windows 2.0 was the application window could overlap each other. So, like, applications could be drug over top of other application windows. Unlike in Windows 1.0, the terminology of minimize and maximize also was introduced in Windows 2.0. Windows 2.0 was relatively obscure operating system, as the popularity of Windows didn't really take off until version 3 in the 90s. Interestingly, Microsoft officially supported Windows 2.0 until December 31st of 2001, a span of 14 years, which is completely unheard of for Microsoft these days. All that being said, Windows 2.0 is probably more important in computer history for being the version of Windows that prompted Apple's famous lawsuit against Microsoft for copyright infringement of the Macintosh operating system. Because up until then, I think macOS was the only one at the time that really looked and felt similar as far as, being able to drag windows and things like that across other windows.
Eric Rangel, I don't think Windows 2 did have solitaire.
No.
You don't really hear people mention Windows 2.0,
No.
very often at all, like ever. It's usually Windows 3.1 is
Yeah.
most
It wasn't quite double
as far
spaced yet.
back. Yeah.
Hi,
December.
I'm going to just break
Sorry,
in
go
here
ahead.
for a sec. Hi, Will.
Hey, Will.
Hey, Mike Fenton.
I was just saying the other day when Eric had mentioned, he hadn't seen me in quite a while. I was like, I also hadn't seen Will in quite a while either. So hello, Will.
He's in Florida at the moment.
Oh, awesome. So he's stateside.
Mhm.
December 10th, 1993, ID Software releases Doom. Video game developer ID Software releases the game Doom. Doom is considered one of the most influential titles in video game history, popularizing the first-person shooter genre with its deathmatch multiplayer mode, its use of graphical violence and satanic imagery. Also made the game controversial, which of course only served to increase Doom's popularity. What was it? I saw the Rigel oscilloscopes, the bench oscilloscopes. You can actually install Doom on them and play Doom on the little screen of the oscilloscope. Yeah. Somebody figured out a workaround and hacked for it. Yeah. December 11th, 2008, Google releases Google Chrome.
Joe's
The first public version of their web browser, Chrome. Let's see. December 2nd, 1980, Apple's IPO makes Forrest Gump rich. Apple Computer holds their initial public offering, selling 4.6 million shares at $22 per share, turning more than 40 Apple employees and investors into instant millionaires, with the stock value closing at $29. The market capitalization puts the company's worth at $1.778 billion. Stock held by Steve Jobs is worth $217 million on that day. Stock held by Steve Wozniak, $116 million. And Mike Markkula, $203 million. This was the largest IPO in the U.S. since the Ford Motor Company in 1956.
I'm just going to interrupt for a quick sec just to mention one of Curtis's comments. He asked if anyone caught the Twitch interview with the two Johns of Doom recently.
I did not.
And I didn't either, but I did catch Darmok and Magra at whatever. And if you don't know that reference, I do what Ryan did and shake my head at you.
December 13th, 1962, NASA launches the Active Repeater Communication Satellite Relay number 1 from Cape Canaveral. One of the earliest communication satellites to be launched. Relay number 1's mission was primarily experimental, but nonetheless was used for some notable events, such as on November 22nd, 1963, Relay 1 was the first satellite to broadcast television from the United States to Japan, which happened to be announced of the announcement of the assassination of John F. Kennedy. It was then again used August of 1964 to broadcast the 1964 Summer Olympics from Japan to Europe and the United States, relaying the signal with another satellite, SYNCOM 3. It was the first time 2 satellites were used in tandem for a television broadcast. And the satellite was in continued use until February 10th of 1965, when a problem with its power system caused the satellite to become non-functional.
And
Some half AA batteries.
Yeah, I like DJ Crazy's comment about Twitch.
People think
That is very very accurate.
Yeah, goes back to what we were talking about earlier.
Mm-hmm.
December 14th, 1902, the first trans-Pacific telegraph cable. The cable ship Silvertown begins laying the first trans-Pacific telegraph cable from San Francisco, destined for Honolulu, Hawaii. After laying 2,238 nautical miles of cable, the Silvertown will land in Honolulu on December 26th. January 1st, 1903, the connection between Hawaii and San Francisco was established. Public messages began transmitting on January 5th. Netscape 1.0 was released December 15th, 1994. Netscape Communications Corporation releases Netscape Navigator 1.0, the world's first commercially developed web browser, although this particular version was free for non-commercial use at the time. And that brings us to our last one for today. Alta Vista launches December 15th, 1995. Developed by researchers at DER, the Digital Equipment Research Laboratories. The Alta Vista search engine is launched. It was the world's first World Wide Web search service to gain significant popularity and one of the most popular search engines in the early World Wide Web. Google didn't overtake Alta Vista until 2001.
I remember using that particular search engine along with Lycos at the time. I think they were the two main
Lycos
search
was huge.
engines.
Yep.
So,
and Curtis, I got your the video you sent me. I will be sharing it around later.
Can I make one note that you missed?
Tech history. Yep.
Can I make one note that you missed? So on December 12th of 1901, Marconi and his assistants, George Kemp, confirmed the reception of the first transatlantic radio signal with a telephone receiver and a wire antenna kept aloft on a kite. They heard the Morse code for the letter S transmitted all the way from Cornwall in England.
That's pretty cool.
That happened in my hometown.
How old were you then, Ryan?
What's that?
How old were you then, Ryan?
Yeah, I was gonna say.
I was but a lad. I was but a lad.
He was a town crier.
Were you helping set up the wire? Come on, be honest. You were what, in your 20s at that point?
I was the kite. I was very young, and I was the kite.
Oh my goodness.
Who remembers Ask Jeeves? That was a good search engine. When you had your own butler.
I can remember that.
Yeah, I remember the Hasta La Vista site as well, which was like the alternative to Alta Vista, which was full of cracks and serial numbers for popular applications at the time.
Yes.
Where is spelled with a Z?
So, with this day in tech history out of the way, did either one of you want to talk about anything before we move to Martin?
I had nothing on my agenda.
Okay.
Oh, I will talk about one thing.
Too late. No, I'm
Oh.
just kidding. Go ahead.
Sorry.
Formal protest.
I didn't mean to be too late. So Sunday, December 24th, Christmas Eve. Dave's
mhm.
Vintage Apple Tech is not streaming. I am announcing it here live.
For the record.
For the record. I will
Breaking
do
news
a 12-hour stream on Christmas
without
Eve
a nap.
without a nap. No promises without a nap. I might take a nap. I can still be on the stream and still take a nap.
Yeah.
That's true.
But it will start at 11 a.m. Eastern time as Dave normally does. So
Speaking of Sunday streams,
we just had an announcement from the newsroom. I have to break. We have some breaking news. It turns out that Ryan of Everything Is Broken Garage will be streaming a 14-hour stream on December 24th, starting at 9 o'clock Newfoundland time.
for the last 8 hours. Hey, listen.
12 divided by 4.
12 divided by 4. Yeah. Listen, you all. I love this. The sleepy Trina cam. Like,
I was just going to mention that speaking of Sunday streams, I still don't have it right. This Sunday is Retro Repair Roundup, which Joe says we will also be doing a holiday stream this weekend.
Yeah.
So
and
yes.
I will be Joe, if you can create the StreamYard link McDoodle while we're streaming maybe tonight. Or no, you're working on servers. I'll bug you tomorrow about it so I can send it out to people. That'd be amazing.
So we have a special guest every week during December for the holidays. We had Joe from jcm-1.com, Joe's Computer Museum, as our first guest this month.
Our first ever guest.
I know, right?
Not only this month,
technically, yes, it was our very first ever guest.
Yeah.
So yeah, very momentous occasion.
Very special. Very special.
And are we? Just a question: where the holidays are coming up? Are we streaming next Friday?
Yeah, I don't have anything going on unless you guys do.
No, I have nothing going on. I just wanted to double check first. That's all. You are special, Joe.
That's
we all love you.
I can't do that.
And we got we got the short orange bus to prove it.
It's not
what was now I completely lost my train of thought. Anyway, so Joe was our first special guest ever for the first week of December, and then followed up with Sean, Geek with Social Skills. Came and shared with us last week. So this week we have Martin. Again, I've got for some reason I always do it backwards. So Macintosh Unboxed UK. That's it.
Yes.
Is going to share with us some special information about computers in the UK.
Yes. Are we ready?
Yep.
Go ahead.
Ready when you are.
Yeah. So
Geronimo.
I'm not actually going to be talking about the Mac for a change. So we're going to go with a company based here in the UK, which people might not be familiar with in the US, which was Acorn Computers, which was quite a big part of the UK's computing industry back in the late 80s and early 90s. But we need to go back a bit further than that, starting back around 1961. People may have been familiar with a particular person called Clive Sinclair, who founded a company back in the 60s called Radionics, which was a developer for calculators and watches, and then later went on to do the Spectrum, which people will be familiar with. So he worked with another guy with Radionics, a guy called Chris Curry, which is one of the founding members for Acorn Computers. And they worked together for a few years before leaving the company that they were working for to start SOC, which was another computer-based company called Science of Cambridge. They also went on to develop a microcomputer kit called the MK14, which was their first microcomputer launch back in the late 60s. Also, Chris Curry wanted to develop the MK14 further. Unfortunately, Sinclair didn't want to pursue that project, so Chris left that company and started his own company. He resigned and was joined by another guy called Herman Hauser to develop the company called CPU Limited. Now, that's quite interesting from there because it was around about the same time when the Apple II was on the scene and tech was really taking off in the US, and they wanted to develop something similar to the Apple II, which is where System 1 came from. System 1 was based off a MOS chip, the 6502, which was later increased. They had different iterations of that: System 2, System 3, and then System 4, which then became famously known as the Atom. So you guys might not be familiar with the Atom, but that was the first sort of commercial-based microcomputer that launched here in the UK. I'm just trying to find...
It kind of looks like the Apple IIc, I want to say.
Yeah, it's very... They all kind of had like a similar design around about that time, because it was quite a competing space back in the late 70s. And this launched 2 years after the Apple II. So I think the Apple II came out in 77. This was launched in 79. So it was the first commercially available product here in the UK. And it sold quite a fair few numbers. So the processor was a 2 megahertz 6502. It supported 64 by 64 4-color display, and it had an 8K ROM, so that it was quite a tiny machine. So that did really, really well. With the success of that, then later came the 6512, which everybody will be familiar with, which is the BBC Micro. This particular machine was a huge commercial success. Like Apple with the Apple II, it kind of sort of sustained Apple's future. I think their profits were around about £3,000 at the time when they launched the Atom, and at the launch of the BBC Micro, that then generated a revenue of up to 8 million. So this was a massive success for them. It was a project that was done in conjunction with the BBC, the British Broadcasting Corporation, and it was delivered in schools around the UK and some countries in Europe as well. So it was a massive success. So 6512 processor, 128K ROM. It also featured the first ever file system, which was called the ADFS file system, BBC Basic. You could actually get these with an optional 20 megabyte hard drive. It also had an Ethernet connector on the back called Ethernet, which was like a bayonet type connector. So this was a commercially, really successful machine, and this carried Acorn for quite a few years. And this was launched in
Martin, I've always wondered something. Maybe you can answer for me. Why was the BBC brought in? Like, what was the thought behind that? Was it just a trying to get it out there and using their name, or were they actively developing software and stuff themselves for educational and for like their own use?
Yeah, it was a joint venture with the BBC. The BBC were brought in basically because the BBC in the UK were quite massive around children's education. So there was a lot of stuff on the TV that were advertising. We used to have like these special programs that was sort of produced around schools, like these special programs that kids would watch, and the BBC wanted to be able to project this on a computer, and they worked closely with Acorn and developed software for them to use around the school. So it was a lot easier for them to do that. And
I wonder
just
if
gave
it's. I wonder if that's similar to like here in the U.S. we have the PBS, the Public Broadcasting System, which was on UHF and VHF and everything.
Yeah.
When I was growing up, it was on the UHF channels, but they did like all the after school programs. So like Reading Rainbow, Arthur, which was all educational. These were all educational wishbone about reading and things. So I'm guessing it's kind of a similar tie, or I guess technically software would be the equivalent of the MECC here in the US and North America.
And now to get my now to get my Canadian and British jab at the United States. You see, in more civilized countries, they have national state television channels that serve educational and culturally appropriate music, TV, and education to their children and all of the adults.
Well, that's why we started MTV.
Americans will.
That's why we started MTV.
Anyway. Sorry, Martin, didn't mean to interrupt. Carry on.
No, you're all right. So at this point, they then changed the company name to SOC, which was essentially a bigger company, and then went on to develop a further computer, which was the Electron. Anybody's familiar with the Electron, which launched in 1983? Do you remember seeing any of that at all?
No.
Over in the US?
I remember seeing an Electron, but only because I've watched RMC a lot, and he has a lot of BBC computers.
Well, that doesn't look like the Large Hadron Collider.
This commercially was actually a failure. It didn't actually sell that well. So it had a slower 6502 processor at 1 megahertz, so it only ran at half the speed. The Atom. But interestingly enough, it was the first computer here in the UK that had a 160 by 256 at 16 color display that it could output. So it was a pretty unique system. And it was basically built off the BBC Micro and just made into a smaller form factor. I think it sold around 450,000 units in its first year, and it was, I think it sold for around £129 at the time, which was quite cheap. So it was quite a cheap unit, and it was one of the first systems that people could go out and buy and actually put in their homes at the time. And it was discontinued in 1985, so it was only around for a couple of years before it was discontinued. So, BBC Micro saw success, obviously, and that carried on, and they carried on selling the BBC Micro for up until the early 90s, which was a similar situation with Apple. They launched the Macintosh in the 80s, but they were still selling alongside the Macintosh, the Apple IIs, because obviously they were where their profit margins were coming from, because the Mac was ultimately not very successful when it launched. So around 1985, Acorn, as we know, it became Acorn. It started to acquire different companies. Olivetti stepped in. I don't know if you've heard of Olivetti. They were a massive PC company at the time. Acorn were going through some financial issues with the disappointment of the Electron. And Olivetti acquired £4 million worth of Acorn shares. And after Acorn refinanced, it left the original shareholders with only 15% of the company.
For a second, when you said 50, how many pounds it was, I was waiting for, because I keep forgetting in the UK that pounds is your dollar. So I'm thinking like they acquired blah 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 pounds of computers. Yeah. Like I'm just imagining like they just acquired this massive pallets and pallets of computers, but never mind.
Trina, computers are not nails that you buy at the local hardware store. You don't go in and buy a bag of 1 pound of nails.
So at one last-ditch attempt, the founders had gone over to the US to have a look at the Apple Lisa at the time, and it was demoed with the window system that the Apple Lisa was using at the time, and Acorn wanted a slice of this. They wanted to generate a computer that had a Windows system, but figured out that they couldn't do it on their existing 6512 processor. It wasn't fast enough. It didn't have all the capabilities needed to be able to do that. And the only competing processor at the time was the 6800 Motorola processor, which is not something that they wanted to go down. So in April of 1985, they invested £5 million with a company called VLSI, which was a semiconductor company. And the first ARM processor was created called the ARM1. For those of you that don't know what ARM stands for, it was originally Acorn RISC Machine. That's what it originally stood for before they changed it. So with the development of the ARM1 processor came the launch of the Archimedes. So the Archimedes was the first sort of PC-based system here in the UK, which was a really, really good system. It had fully featured Windows system, which started off as Arthur OS and then developed into RISC OS, which was built on a single 2 megabyte ROM chip in the Archimedes machine.
And I'm sorry, what year was this released again, Martin?
This was 1987.
Wow.
So would this been a competitor to like Amiga?
Yes, so this was dubbed as the competitor to the Amiga at the time.
Because I mean, even looking at it, it's very, very similar to like an Amiga, like the look and feel of the computer physically, as well as the on-screen look. So
this machine broke a few records. It was known as the Archimedes 400. It had the ARM1 and ARM2 processor. It had 512K of memory, but could be maxed out at 16 megabytes. It had a 640 by 256, 256 color RGB display. It had 32, the processor was 32-bit ready. It had 26-bit addressing. The processor ran at 8 megahertz, and it was the fastest microprocessor in the world at that time. It was roughly 7 times the performance of a typical 7 megahertz 6800 based system. So it was breaking massive records when it was first released. And this is where kind of ARM had sort of set itself in stone, really. That, you know, a lot of people kind of watched, and Sinclair at this point had kind of missed the boat because he didn't want to jump on this bandwagon. He didn't want to get involved with the Acorn part of the business. So he kind of missed out really on this whole Acorn development. So it's been quite fun to watch this grow. So this computer at the time was actually faster than the Macintosh SE or the Amiga A500 that was out around about the same time. So they're the comparisons. The ARM2 processor featured a 32-bit data bus, 26-bit address space, and 27 32-bit registers. So it was a beast. And this sold for around 5 years. So all the BBC Micros in schools later got replaced by this, and it was all, you know, network ready with their own sort of network system. It was compatible with IBM systems. You could hook it up to an IBM server and file transfer off it. So after the success of the Archimedes, and this came in different forms. So the one that you're looking at now is the A400 series, but they did like a keyboard version of this, which is the A3000, which looked like the Amiga 500. So it was just everything condensed down into a keyboard format, which you'll see a later revision of that. But after this one, we had the A3010. So the A3010 was the first consumer-based product that you could buy from a mail order company that kids could use at home. It had the RISC-OS-based operating system, which was version 3 at the time. This launched in 1991 and was updated in 92. As you can see, there is a little demo of the RISC-OS-based operating system. So this had a 25 megahertz processor. No, sorry, 12 megahertz processor, 4 mega RAM, and could have a 50 megabyte hard drive inside it as well. And it was one of the first computers to adopt the 15-pin VGA connector. And this was commercialized massively in schools. You have to remember, though, Acorn was a very big educational market here in the UK. So like you guys in the US, you had Apple IIs, obviously the Macs. They were quite big in the US, whereas we had these. I actually do miss them because they were quite a robust machine. They weren't like the software was all chip based. You couldn't ever mess up the operating system at all. Anything could be fixed with a quick reboot, and it boots up within seconds.
Perfect for school environment, obviously.
Right.
Yeah. So with the launch of this as well came the RISC-based school server, which ironically wasn't running RISC-OS. It was an IBM PowerPC based server and was running Windows, and that would control all of the school's networking. It was still developed by Acorn, but built by IBM. So after this, we've gone back to desktop form with the A5000, and then the later revised version of RISC-OS 3.11, which had apps built into the ROM. So we had Draw, Paint, Calculator, all those different apps that were built into the ROM chip. This was a 25 megahertz machine, 4 mega RAM. It was the first machine with SVGA with 800 by 600, 16 color. A 1.44 floppy drive, and an 80 megabyte hard drive.
What are we going to do with all that room on the hard drive?
I know, right?
80 megabytes.
So you can see there the bottom left icon on the RISC-OS display where it says Cromwell, which is the hard drive icon. And you just used to load all your apps in. Pretty similar to the way that Mac OS used to run, is that you would drag your application into your hard drive and just leave it. It would work the same way with RISC-OS. There was no installation process with Acorn. You just drag the app onto your hard drive and it would just work. And all your information would be just stored that way. So moving along to 1994, was the launch of the RISC PC. Now, this is my favorite machine of the Acorn era. This is when things really started to heat up for Acorn, which was the launch of the ARM 610 processor. It's a 30 megahertz processor. You could have up to 256 megabytes of RAM. It had dedicated 2 megabytes graphics card. The ROM was upgraded to 4 megabytes because obviously the RISC-OS had got fatter. There was more apps in it. It evolved, and it was the first system with a PDS based expansion for expansion cards. So you could add a DOS compatibility card that were made by Orange Micro, same company that used to make DOS compatibility cards for the Mac. You could put a DVD-ROM drive. You could put MIDI interfaces in this, and if you could see, like, on the right-hand screen with the one with the monitor on, it's only got like one base unit. Can you see that with the drive and the floppy? And then on the second screen, there is like a second base unit that sits on top. And then what made this machine unique is that you could have up to 6 of these, and they called them slices. You could fit different modules and components into these slices and stack them on top of each other. And they would do different things, but they would all integrate into the same system. So it was a really, really versatile unit.
Is that on the picture on the left? Is that like an audio controller on the top slice?
Yeah, it's the audio controller with a built-in equalizer. It was just
Wow,
a
very
lot of
cool.
this was used for like music production in schools, like for
Why-
music classes and stuff like that. So it was really, really popular.
Why is that hard drive installed backwards?
I'm not quite sure. I'm not sure. I've not actually seen
First wireless
Yeah.
drive.
First wireless
I
drive.
don't know. I've not actually seen it installed like that before.
Yeah, I was
but
like, I think that was a mistake.
Yeah. So these machines could be upgraded. These were highly upgradable because another company was making strong arm processors. So you could put a 300 megahertz processor in these. So you could go from a 30 megahertz processor to a 300 megahertz processor. It was just
wow.
Crazy.
It was crazy how much these could be upgraded. And the maximum amount of RAM you could have in these was nearly a gigabyte. So it was
Jeez.
nuts, considering that these were launched in 1994. It was just insane what you could do with them. So this was then the demise of Acorn as we know it after this, because they had some financial issues, couldn't restructure. No, everybody was moving away from this kind of form factor and moving more towards PCs with the launch of Windows with Windows 95. It kind of killed Acorn off as base, and schools then moved to Windows-based machines. It was more practical for them. It was cheaper. Because these machines at the time were quite expensive. If you wanted a RISC PC of this specification, just for the base unit, it was about £2,500. Obviously, they were subsidised for schools, but it was still cheaper to go out and buy a beige PC that was pre-built by a third-party company and just install them in schools at like £600. It's far cheaper to go and get those, hook them up to a modern Ethernet network than because these hadn't adapted to Ethernet at the time. They were still using their own networking capabilities. They hadn't quite caught on to the Ethernet at that time. So they planned to fix that with the launch of the Phoebe, which was going to come in 1997, but it was killed. This was the last revision of RISC OS that was made by Acorn before they were killed.
And they never released this yellow box, correct?
No, it was cancelled. There's a few prototypes of this that are floating around. I know there's been a couple of YouTubers that have got hold of these. I think there is a couple of people in our server that has actually got one. A couple of different. There was a couple of these prototypes that were hanging around, and I know somebody that is trying to rebuild one of these.
Because they look like it looks like, honestly, I would love to have one of those in my. And believe it or not, not to sell it, to actually have it in my collection. I know this is going to come crazy.
Yeah, so this was going to be the 233 megahertz strong arm with a 64K frontside bus, 512 megabytes of RAM, 4 PCI slots, a slot load DVD, and a 6.4 gigabyte hard drive. So it would have been quite a good machine for the era.
Yeah.
But it didn't show any interest. In 1998, Acorn split and sold off to various third-party companies. So there was loads of different companies floating around at the time that took on. It's a bit like what Apple were doing back in the 90s, where they licensed to different companies to make clones. So we had StarMax, we had Power Computing. With Acorn, we had similar situations where they would make the hardware, and then Acorn would just concentrate on making the software and licensing it out, which didn't really work out. So Acorn actually finished trading in 2015. So it wasn't actually that long that it ended.
Well, 2015 was only a couple of years ago. So in my mind, it's only like 2 years ago.
What's interesting is that the operating system is still being developed today, and obviously as we know it, it's called RISC OS Direct, and you can download an image of it for the Raspberry Pi. It runs really well on the Raspberry Pi 4. They've done a lot to the operating system since the 90s. It's really, really good. It's got loads of different programming languages and apps that are supported by it. And I think the remaining part of the company...
Is it open source now? Sorry, the operating system, is it considered like Linux, like where
No,
it's open source?
it's still closed. It's still closed source.
Okay.
People have been trying to get it open source for years because they want to do like a variant of it that will run on different platforms, but it is literally just stuck to the ARM based processor at the moment.
Okay.
So yeah, at the end of 2015, the remaining part of Acorn got sold off to Morgan Stanley in the US, and Element 14, which Element 14 still run, parts of the operating system and, sell it out to various third parties. So that is pretty much it. I mean, there's a few old magazine fronts. I mean, we had quite a big magazine user base for this back in the 90s and the early 80s.
Well, yeah, it would make sense because they were so dominant in the school back then. Makes sense that they'd have a magazine, a magazine as well.
What really fascinates me is the fact that I think if it had gone a bit more global, if the US or Canada have got hold of this, it might have been a bit more successful for them. But I think they targeted just the UK market, which wasn't enough for them to sort of cement themselves in history.
Right.
But the best thing to come out of this was obviously the development of the ARM processor, because without Acorn, the ARM processor probably wouldn't have existed. So we have them to thank, really. Apple now use them. These are the different form factors of the third-party companies that they came up with. Later on in the early 2000s, so we had the MicroStation, the A6, which was fairly popular amongst music production, and then on the left-hand side, which is the beige box, which was Acorn's last ever machine that they produced, which was the A7000, which was a really nice machine. It was really well received, but just didn't do the numbers that it needed to sustain its business.
Curtis Boyle has a question. Did they not target the European mainland either, or it was just the UK?
It was mainly the UK, UK, Australia, and there was some of it in Germany and France. But other than that, it was not massive like it should have been. I think it should have been a lot bigger than it was. But it was the same in Australia. A lot of Australian schools had these computers as well. So these are the systems that I grew up with. Back in the 80s, they were amazing to play with, great for playing games on. One of the games that got ported from the Amiga to the Acorn was Lemmings, which was, you could spend literally hours playing that game. And the best thing about Lemmings on an Acorn was that the graphics was just so much better, because everything was in 256 colors. It was just brilliant. I have tried using this on a Raspberry Pi, but it's just not the same. It's not the same experience. It's like us guys that collect retro Macs. You want to be able to feel the whole environment of having a real Mac in front of you and playing around with it. But these machines are actually really difficult to get hold of. There's not many of them about, and people that do have them tend to keep them. And if they do float around on eBay, they go for thousands of pounds. And unfortunately, they suffer the same fate with early Macs as well, because Acorn used the dreaded battery that the Macs used back in the 90s, which was the half AA battery.
Oh, no.
So most of them suffered with exploded dodgy boards. So.
Yeah.
So there you go. That is the Acorn history, pretty much in a nutshell.
No pun intended on that, with the nutshell and an acorn.
Yeah. There you go.
That's awesome.
Done. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen some BBC Micro and Acorn computers, but I didn't know nearly as much about them. because we just didn't have them here growing up. I've still never seen one in person.
Yeah. What's really interesting is the fact that the 6502 processor, which they started with, you kind of forget how popular that CPU was.
Oh yeah,
because it was pretty much mainstream back in the 70s. It was the one that everybody wanted.
Well, everyone was smoking marijuana and doing LSD. They didn't have time to develop other processors.
Yeah. But I would say the Atom and the Electron was very, very similar to the Apple II in terms of its capabilities.
So, Gutbomb, just in regards to that movie, is it like a documentary, or like, is it kind of one of these, like the movie Pride, as an example, which fictionalizes parts of what happens?
I've heard of that, but I haven't actually watched it yet. But there is a lot of, I think still to this day, there's a lot of beef between Sinclair and Acorn, because I don't know why he didn't jump on this. I think if he'd have been part of the whole ARM sort of development, he'd have been a lot richer than what he is now. But
he's dead now, so he's not really rich.
No, I know, but I just think, why did you not want to develop a platform any further, considering it had potential, and a lot of people were buying the kits, the Kit 14, which was basically like the early Steve Jobs building his Apple II in his garage. Do you know what I mean? Like his early sort of prototypes. But
don't forget the third investor in Apple also walked away.
Ron Wayne.
The third he walked away. So
Ron Wayne,
hindsight is always 20/20, right?
Well,
hindsight is always 20/20.
What was it? He spent like less than 2 weeks with the Steves and was like, "Screw this, I'm out." I think it was like 10 or 12 days or something he spent with them, and then was like, "Yep, no." And he kicked himself in the ass for years afterwards.
Clive Sinclair jumped into bed with Amstrad eventually, because they developed the Sinclair PC, didn't they? They did like a collaboration.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And as Garth pointed out, Clive Sinclair was too busy making his electric bike. He was the C5. Mm-hmm. He was all about the C5.
Yeah.
That wouldn't surprise me. Ronald Wayne couldn't handle the smells.
I'm actually surprised. I've done a archive search. We're just going to leave it at that for Micromen, and it didn't come up with any adult related results, which I was actually surprised with.
The only thing I didn't
say something, but I'll wait.
The only thing I didn't mention was that they developed a laptop as well, which I didn't have a picture for, which was the A4, which was very similar to the PowerBook 170 at the time.
Oh, that's cool.
But it was like twice as powerful. But like I said, with these computers being as powerful as they were back in the 90s, the fact that they didn't go mainstream and global really surprised me. And yet we're only now seeing the ARM effect now, 20 years on.
Right.
So it's really weird.
I wonder though, were there any sanctions in place or any like rules about the UK not wanting to have like a brain drain and lose all of their?
Well, I don't want to get political, but there is a section in this where
I feel like there's a Margaret Thatcher kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. So the Labour government at the time created this thing for entrepreneurs and people in tech to develop their skills and invent. And they kind of said, we need more people like this. We want to invest, which kind of catapulted people into the electronics industry. And then obviously Margaret Thatcher came in when she was elected. It's the first thing that she killed was that section of the business. And obviously, technology didn't grow. Her focus was.
I also wonder too, just for the simple fact that there were literally crap tons of computers and availability at the time, Apple and Apple clones and things like that, if it just may be a cost perspective too, like it was just too damn expensive to try and sell and ship and market these computers outside of the UK, to like the US, for example,
And
just because it's going to be
let's be
twice
honest.
as much as what you could get here already.
Well,
And let's be honest, the Americans are going to want to buy American, right? The Americans are going to want to buy Apple. They're going to want to buy IBM. They're going to want to buy Commodore because they're American.
Yeah,
Mhm.
I mean,
Not
the
this
peak of
weird
April-
British computer.
Well, sure, you figure that was right after the
They were worth 135 million. So they were not a small company. They were quite massive.
That's true too.
Yeah.
But yeah, I really think that just because of the overabundance at that time period, there were just so many players, especially for low cost or education and stuff like that. It just may not have been fiscally, worth it to even pursue going outside the UK.
Yeah, I mean, it's just a shame because they started off really well. When they launched the Electron and the Atom, they were priced quite reasonably. And then by the time they jumped on the ARM bandwagon and developed the Archimedes, the price just rose considerably. They hadn't... They became like the Apple of now, basically. They built really good products, but priced it so high that people couldn't buy them. So your average consumer couldn't buy one. You had to have a lot of money to be able to afford them. And by the time we got to the late 90s, schools were just saying, sorry, we can't
afford it. It's not in our budget. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I know even with us here in the US, it was very late 90s where schools, at least where I grew up, started switching to Dells, and like PC computers at the time, instead of Apple. Because mid 90s, we had Apple everywhere in the classrooms. And then it's just
it was a
started
combination
phasing
of
out
bad
PC.
government at the time, cutting budgets in schools. Then, once the school budget was cut by a government, schools then couldn't afford the latest and greatest. They were then reduced to different machines, which I think the government played a massive part in killing Acorn's business. But some will say that that's not true, but I do think that had a major play in it.
No,
Just
I
like what
can
they've done
totally
with
see that.
ARM now, they sold off ARM to, SoftBank, which they should never have done it. They should have kept it here in the UK. But, people do stupid things.
Yep, absolutely. But yeah, I mean that stuff happens, here too.
Oh yeah. And again, hindsight is 20/20. I mean, you look at it's a failing company. Why would we keep their IP? It just seems foolish. If we can get a few dollars for it by selling it to some, Asian soft bank, let's do it. Let's get rid of it and make some money. Not realizing that ARM is currently the king. So.
Yeah, I mean, we're quite fortunate that part of the deal with SoftBank was that the head office for ARM PLC had to be held here in the UK. So it's still in Cambridge, where it started. The bulk of the business is owned by Asians. It's like here in the UK at the moment, we're either like buildings and businesses are either owned by the Asians or the UEA. So nothing is ever British anymore.
The other interesting thing now is with all the sanctions that are in place with around AI and ARM processors not being allowed to be exported to certain markets, risk is starting to take off again in huge leaps and bounds. So it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when risk surpasses ARM and becomes the standard processor. I mean, it might take 15 years, but I could see that, especially with the way ARM is going, being very possible.
Yeah, I mean,
absolutely.
How long it'll go for, I don't know. I mean, every silicon-based chip will hit its curveball eventually, just like x86 is doing now. But Intel's new chips that they're releasing after Christmas, 14th gen, is it? Certainly in laptops, I've seen the performance of those are insane. Like, I don't know what they've done with them, but Intel seems to have got their shit together since this new CEO's come in. So hopefully,
well, they've also invested hugely. They've invested hugely in production facilities, although unfortunately some of the biggest new production facilities they have are actually in Israel. So it's been somewhat of a dampening on them for production for obvious reasons. So, yeah, it'll be interesting to see. They're actually producing for other people now, too. You will see Intel producing for Qualcomm and for, who knows, maybe even Chinese RISC manufacturers who can't get AI chips from Intel.
Yep.
Right? So it's going to be interesting to see.
Yeah, I mean, Intel has some pretty big facilities, and I know that they're outsourcing a lot of their work to other companies now, which I think was one of their biggest problems. I think they needed to do that because I can't remember the name who developed Apple's CPUs. I should know, but I've got brain mush going on at the moment.
RTSC?
Yeah, so TSMC.
Or TSMC, over in Taiwan.
Yeah, so, they are like one of the biggest now chip manufacturers for a lot of companies, and it's like loads of companies are trying to compete to get space in their manufacturing facilities to get their processors, because their nodes are so tiny now. I think we're down to like what, 2 nanometers.
Yep. Well, and then it's weird. Like, TSMC is the leader as far as chip manufacturing and the
I'll be right back. My food's about to arrive.
But it's ASML Holdings that owns and like pretty much makes the only machines that make this stuff, and they're Dutch. So like the machines themselves that make the chips are from the Dutch, and obviously they have the best equipment because that's what all these places like TSMC and all these other newer ones that are spinning up, like even the ones here in the US that they're building, chip manufacturers, they're all using the same equipment.
What happens when we get to 1 nanometer? Where do we go from there? What happens next?
We move away from silicon. We go into what's it called, graphene or graphite or whatever the next smaller thing is.
Yeah. I think.
But just to give you an example, that Intel plant that they just built south of Tel Aviv is supposed to start operation in 2027. Its cost so far is $25 billion for a building. So
here, July 2022, MIT News announced that the cubic boron arsenide could be a possible alternative to silicon. It performs better than silicon at conducting heat and electricity. So they actually are already working on and have other stuff in the process. But everything's kind of done by Moore's law. So it's going to happen at some point.
We've already exceeded Moore's law. I mean,
silicon.
Moore's law.
Moore's law is kind of not. Yeah, it's not a thing anymore. We've kind of exceeded that. So
if you work at NVIDIA, it's dead. Because their CEO basically pronounced it dead, 2 years ago? Said it was completely not a thing anymore?
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. I think the NVIDIA ARM acquisition could have been very, very bad for everybody if that had gone ahead. And I'm glad it didn't.
What do you mean Sorry, what acquisition did you say? I didn't hear.
NVIDIA and ARM. They were gonna. NVIDIA were gonna buy ARM, but it got thrown out by the various different regulators.
it's interesting. You know, for anybody who follows modern tech stuff, which a lot of us do. NVIDIA is to the point now where they make so much money not in graphics cards that it almost makes no sense for them to do graphics cards anymore.
Yep.
So there's been this theory that they may spin off the graphics division. They may, you know, slowly move away from consumers products, because you have to look at it. They're selling AI chips and stuff to Google and to Microsoft and, you know, Amazon. There are 1, 2, 3 big customers that spend billions of dollars with them, or do they want to deal with 75 million mouth breathers living in their parents' basements about how the new RTX, you know, or not RTX, GTX, or whatever the NVIDIA graphics cards are called now, 3080 is slightly hotter than the previous 2080, right? From a business perspective, it makes maybe more sense for them to say, forget the graphics cards. Let's just do.
They're just insanely expensive anyway for what they are. I mean, like, I've never been a massive fan of NVIDIA graphics cards anyway. I mean, I was up until a point with the 20 series. I loved the 20 series. The 20 series was really good cards. The 30 series, you then started to feel that they were hot cards, you know, like they were heating up too much. And then with the 40 series, the size of them now, you know, the problems that they're having.
The stupid connector.
Yeah, it's just ridiculous.
Stupid connector.
They need to...
It's so the thing is so big. You could literally have gigantic connectors for each little individual wire, because the card is so massive. Why does it need this weird new standardized small thing? Anyway, just grinds my gears.
I will forever be AMD. I've always had AMD cards. I think I've only ever had one NVIDIA card, and that was a GTX 980 Ti, which I love that card. I mean, they don't make them like that anymore. No, I don't know why they did it, but I'm sure we're going to get an answer.
Gutbaum has a saucy answer for it, I'm sure. I'm sure it's going to be very provocative.
It makes no sense to me. I've seen
because my connector's too small or something.
Because my connector's too small.
Yes, I was into ATI before they sold to AMD. I loved the ATI cards.
And ATI was a Canadian company, as was AMD at one point.
And so was the ever elusive Commodore phone.
Correct. And the Commodore filing cabinet.
Yeah.
I wonder if we were going to get through a stream without mentioning that Commodore phone.
Nope.
Hasn't happened yet.
It is a point of contention.
Yes.
Everybody wants
when the Americans decide to manifest their destiny and come take over Canada, that's one of the things that they're going to demand.
Right.
Honest to
hand over
God,
all the Commodore phones.
You know, like on Star Trek with the replicator machines, where you can tell it what you want. Commodore phones will be the very first thing produced on the damn things once they're real. That's exactly what it's going to be.
Yeah.
Not food. It'll be Commodore phones. That'll be the first request. Commodore phone.
And if you are desperately hungry, you just have to lick it.
That's right. Before you stick it. So we are
not even Trina
past the hour.
Wow.
Yes, we're 10 minutes past our hour.
Myself a Commodore.
Sorry, did I bore you that much? I wasn't sure how long I was going to be going for.
No, that's perfect. But no, we usually try and cap it. We've gone over an hour several times, but we try and cap it in an hour so we don't lose people's interest.
Now, normally we would say, hey, let's all jump over on Discord for the after party.
Yes.
But it seems like Discord's having some trouble this evening, so
they are.
That might not work.
So people are more than welcome to come on to here until at what point Discord does work.
Correctly. I think they have fixed it now.
Oh, it is?
Oh, have they? Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, is this why was Discord not working earlier? I'm not on it really much.
There's no errors on the client anymore.
Yep.
Cloudflare had an outage of some sort.
Normal.
Yeah.
Perfect.
I blame it on Linus Tech Tips. There's got to be some correlation to Discord not working.
Yeah.
I just think Ricky and the IT department tripped over a cable.
Yep.
Joe
Tune
just-
to the
Joe
next Wayne show.
Joe just said Discord's okay.
Speak.
So
Okay.
Perfect.
So yes.
All right.
Pop
Well, on
into
that
the
note,
chewing of the fat. So thank you, Martin, for
Thank you,
joining us
everybody.
and
yeah,
going over
Thank you, Martin.
acorn history.
honestly,
really appreciate
Martin,
it.
that was really I didn't know. So yeah, thank
Trina
you.
had such a good nap. She had such a fantastic nap.
Well,
She's ready to
she
go.
did
She's
say
energized.
She was going to sleep through my presentation, but she didn't, so I'm impressed.
Yeah,
That's
no,
true.
Or
actually,
did she?
I no, because I even asked questions for the presentation, so it
Yeah.
told me I was actually awake.
I smell an AI. I smell an AI.
So
I think.
Trina
please
AI
hit the like
bottle,
button if you haven't already subscribed.
Yes.
Don't forget to laugh
And-
through that like button and
Trina, copyright.
oh whatever.
Hit that like button and make sure you share it with your friends.
Yes,
Yeah.
lick the like button.
Yes, lick it.
Yes.
and please subscribe
Look
to
at
my
those money.
channel. I will have content on there soon, I promise.
We
Yes.
will.
Subscribe to Martin if you haven't.
Yes, absolutely. Yes.
And also
I will get some
subscribe
content out.
to Trina's Technobabble if you haven't done that.
Nobody
I-
cares, Trina.
Listen,
Nobody cares.
I wasn't asking you.
And on that bombshell, I want to say good night, everybody.
Good night, everybody.